It is that time of year again, folks, for me to update the list of top 10 Sea Store ships in Star Trek Online. Now, honestly, it was kind of difficult narrowing this list down to just 10 ships because over the past few years, we've been getting some really good Sea Store ships in Star Trek Online. So let's take a look. As usual with this kind of video, I'm going to be starting off with the older ships and then moving on to the newer ships, but beyond that, these are going to be presented in no particular order. And this first ship really shouldn't be any surprise that this is still on the top 10 list because I have said many times this is my favorite ship in Star Trek Online, the Terran Lexington Dreadnought Cruiser. The Lexington is great for an energy weapon build, it being a primary America worker ship with a secondary intel seat, so you're going to be able to fit on things like narrow sensor bands and mixed armament synergy, but with that intel seat, you'll also be able to put on some extra unconventional systems triggers or add things like override subsystem safeties to further help out with your weapon power levels. And it having 5 engineering console slots plus that universal console slot from it being America worker ship means it's going to have plenty of room for ISO mags as well. Because it's a dreadnought, that means it also has a hangar bay, so you're going to be able to have some room for some extra pets in there. You can fit whatever you want. The Valkyrie's always nice because they deal some extra damage, but normally I run with the Type 7s for their powerful debuff abilities. Lexington also has a Spinal Lance weapon, which can be fun to play around with, but that Spinal Lance is kind of dragged down with the fact that the ship does have a 4-4 weapons layout, meaning you're probably going to want to set up a broadside build on this thing, so you're not going to get a lot of use out of that Spinal Lance because the Spinal Lance has a 90-degree forward weapon arc, and, you know, if you're broadsiding, you're probably not going to be angled in the correct direction to be using that much anyway. But beyond that one shortcoming, this is still a really nice ship to have, and one I still recommend today. Next is the Terran Adamant Intel Heavy Raider. This is another ship that's really good for energy weapons, but has a very different vibe from the Lexington. Lexington being a very large, bulky dreadnought that can take a punch, this is a small, maneuverable, stealthy raider-type ship. It being an intel ship with a secondary temporal seat means not only is it good for energy weapons, but it also feeds really well into the unconventional systems trait, meaning you're going to be able to get your universal consoles off of cooldown that much more quickly. This ship being a raider means it also has a lot of universal seating on it, so that means you're going to be able to have a lot of flexibility in how you set up your bridge officer seating. Additionally, the ship is also going to have raider flanking, so you're going to want to focus on the aft firing arcs of your enemies because you're going to be able to do some extra damage on top of your normal weapon damage thanks to raider flanking. So you're going to want to be mindful of where you're shooting at your enemy with this type of ship. Fortunately, with this ship's innate battle cloak, you're going to be able to get in and out of flanking damage pretty easily. On top of all that, the ship also comes with a very powerful DPS console called Agony Redistribution, which you focus it on one target, and any damage you deal to that target, it will spread some of that damage around to surrounding targets. And this thing being a full intel ship, it can support surgical strikes, so you're able to focus a lot of damage onto one big heavy target and then spread some of that around to some surrounding targets. So it's a pretty solid console that meshes really well with this ship. Next is the Terran Eagle Pilot Raider, which is very similar to the Adamant, but also quite a bit different from the Adamant in terms of what sort of build it's best suited for. Like the Adamant, this has a 5-1 weapons layout with an experimental weapon slot. This one actually has an enhanced battle cloak instead of just a regular battle cloak, and it's got raider flanking because it is a raider, and a bunch of universal seating because it, again, raider. But this ship is instead a pilot ship with a secondary lieutenant commander level command seat, which means you have enough room for concentrate firepower on this thing, so you can run a torpedo build on this thing. And that's the whole vibe of this ship, where the Adamant wants you to go for, like, you know, stealthy surgical strike stuff. This one wants you to go for stealthy, but also speedy and possibly doing barrel rolls because of that pilot seat. But this one is going for more of a stealth bomber type thing with letting you zoom in and out of combat with that enhanced battle cloak and just dropping loads of torpedoes onto your enemies. So, very similar ship to the Adamant, but also quite a bit of a different vibe, just depending on what sort of build you're wanting to go for. So if you like torpedo builds over energy weapons, then the Eagle might be better suited for you. Next is the Bozeman Intel Heavy Frigate, and honestly, probably the best way to give you an idea of what the ship is sort of like a halfway point between the Lexington and the Dreadnought. Where the Lexington, it's a very big, bulky Dreadnought, and the Adamant is a very fast, very nimble, very squishy ship. This is sort of like an in-between point. If you want something that's not quite as big or slow as Lexington, but you don't want something as fragile and squishy as the Adamant, this is a good in-between. Like those other two, it's still well-suited for energy weapon builds. Like Lexington, it's got a good amount of engineering console slots, so you can load it up with ISO mags. Like Adamant, it's still got a bunch of universal seating on it because this is a frigate, which is sort of like a cruiser version of a raider type escort. So it's got some of those bonuses that the raiders have. So it's got all that universal seating on it. Plus, it's got raider flanking on it. Though it's not quite as durable as a lot of the cruisers in the game, it is definitely going to be more durable than most of the escorts in the game. So, like I said, a decent in-between. This one also does have a cloaking device, but it's a standard cloaking device, so you're not going to get a lot of use out of that. You're beyond just the initial entrance into combat. The Bozeman also has a pretty decent console on it. Tachyon net drones. It basically launches a bunch of drones that fill up this big area of effect. Anything caught within that area of effect, they'll receive, or any enemies caught within that area of effect will receive certain debuffs that will allow you to deal more damage to them. Next up is the Ahwahnee Command Carrier. Now, as a playable ship, this probably isn't going to be everyone's vibe. This is a classic carrier, meaning it's only got a 3-3 weapons layout, and it's pretty heavy in the science seating. But this one does come with some really cool stuff on it. So even if you don't like the ship itself, the stuff it comes with could be really helpful on another ship. If you really like energy weapon builds, you are going to want the console off of the Ahwahnee. Fleet Power Network Array has been an insane buff for energy weapon builds because of the massive haste buff that it is capable of giving. It's also really great for support builds because that haste buff can be applied to not just you, but to other players. So it's a really great console all around, again, if you like energy weapon builds. If you are like running ships with a hangar bay or two, again, you're probably going to want this ship because of the shuttles that it comes with. The Type 7 shuttles, while on paper aren't very powerful, just, from a pure DPS standpoint on their part, these things are capable of using some very powerful debuff abilities. So while their damage isn't that powerful, they are capable of allowing you to do a lot more damage to your enemy targets. So these are very powerful pets when utilized just on their own. Like, you don't need superior area denial or any other consoles or traits to make them better, because the whole idea with them is they're making your build better, not the other way around. So if you like running pet builds that are focused on the whole carrier vibe thing of, being a carrier that supports your pets to allow them to do more damage, then you're probably going to want this thing's Starship trait, Flagship Staffing. So overall, the ship itself probably isn't going to be everyone's thing, but it comes with a lot of really great stuff that is going to be very useful on a variety of different builds. So I definitely recommend picking it up on that merit alone. Okay, moving on to stuff that's new to the list. First is the Typhon Command Escort Carrier, which was from last year's very popular Heritage Starship Bundle. Now, like the Ahwahnee, if you like pet builds, you're gonna want this ship. However, this one doesn't have a lot of the shortcomings that the Ahwahnee has. This is an escort carrier, which so far is a unique type of ship. There hasn't been another one like this. Typically, ships that are very tactical focused that also have 2 hangar bays are typically dreadnought carriers, but this isn't that. This is basically a smaller, more nimble escort-type vessel with a 4-3 weapons layout, but instead of an experimental weapon slot, it gets 2 hangar bay slots. Normally, I would say that 4-3 weapons layout is sort of a drawback, but I think that's intentional as a way to not make it overpowered in comparison to a typical strike-wing escort, which only have 1 hangar bay. Whereas this thing has 2 hangar bays. Technically 3 if you're using its Starship trait, because its Starship trait will effectively give you a 3rd hangar base worth of fighters every time you launch your own fighter pets. So if you really like pet builds, this is something to go for. Next, also from the Heritage Starship Bundle, is the Achilles Miracle Worker Heavy Destroyer. This is a full Miracle Worker ship, so it's also going to be really well suited for energy weapon builds. This is going to be another one that's sort of like a faster, somewhat less durable version of the Lexington. However, unlike Lexington, the ship is much more tactical focused and has a 5-2 weapons layout, so it's much better suited to a forward-facing build than a broadsiding build. It also does have the slight drawback of having very few engineering console slots, so you're going to want to get this thing upgraded to T6X2 so you can get a decent amount of ISO mags onto this thing. While being a pretty decent ship, this thing also comes with some really nice toys on it. Its console, Micro-Quantum Torpedo Phalanx Array, basically it shoots a bunch of torpedoes at a bunch of surrounding targets. It does a surprising amount of damage even outside of a torpedo build, so you wouldn't want to run a torpedo build on this one, but even then, I would still consider running that console because it does a pretty nice amount of damage, and it shoots all the things around you with small AoEs, so it's really good at dealing a lot of damage to multiple enemy targets at once, if that's something you're wanting to do. But because the console is focused around torpedoes, if you do put it on an actual torpedo build, which I would not do on the ship because it's a Miracle Worker ship, but if you actually do put that on a torpedo build, it does quite a bit of damage because you're already buffing the kinetic damage, so it ends up being pretty nice. The other really nice thing about this ship is the experimental weapon, the hexacannons. These things are a very powerful experimental weapon, and in fact, as of recording this, are the best experimental weapon in the game right now. So it's a really great way to just get the best experimental weapon in the game as an account unlock, because this is a C-Store ship, and all of your escort type ships are going to have an experimental weapon slot, so it's going to be really nice to have just one of the best experimental weapons in the game just as an account unlock. I know there's that other one that unlocked with the Pioneer, but that one's clearly not finished. That was clearly released accidentally with the Pioneer, because Pioneer doesn't even have an experimental weapon slot, so it makes no sense for it to unlock with that. And if you look at the tooltip on it, it's clearly unfinished, so I don't know how that's going to be actually introduced, but I know that one, people are saying that one's already beating the hexacannons, but at the same time, the fact that it's unfinished, we don't know if that's going to still be true when it's been fully released. So right now, I'm still going to say hexacannons are the best in slot for now until we see what's to officially come in the future. Next, from the recently released 15th anniversary bundle, the Corella Temporal Battlecruiser. Now, with this ship, broadsiding is the theme here, which I do still have some qualms about how that was implemented. I'm sure plenty of you are expecting me to complain about the 4-4 weapons layout again. I know I went pretty hard on that, and I stand by that, but the more I've thought about the ship, the more I'm hung up on that it should not have been a temporal ship. It should have been an intel ship, because intel feeds better into the energy weapon theme there, and if you're broadsiding, you're doing energy weapons. So I feel like that would have been a better choice, but that's not a rant I need to get into in this video. Broadsiding, though, if you like broadsiding, this is a ship to get. Not so much because of the ship's stats, because, again, I don't think temporal was a great choice for this as its main specialization, but its console and starship trait are really great for broadside builds, especially if you are running phaser for your broadside build. Because the starship trait effectively gives you an additional weapon. Basically, it fires an extra phaser array every time you fire your own weapon. So you're effectively being given an extra phaser weapon for your left and right broadsides that will deal in 90 degrees. And it only has like a 5-kilometer range, so it's not like stupid OP. But like if you like broadside builds and you're in the habit of getting close enough within that 5-kilometer range, you're going to deal some pretty nice damage with that starship trait. And it's a similar story with the console. The console deals some arc damage in a 90-degree arc on either side of your weapon, deals some phaser damage on either side. Really nice for a broadside build. It's also got a fairly low cooldown in comparison to most universal consoles, so you're going to be able to use that fairly often. I think it's only like a minute-long cooldown as opposed to the normal 2 minutes. So again, really nice console, really nice trait if you like broadsiding. Next is the Ark Royal Intel Science Carrier, and as of recording this is actually a very unique ship in that it is the only standard carrier with a secondary deflector and sensor analysis. This is something Star Trek Online is experimenting with, and they've said publicly that this could change and that they could be adding secondary deflectors to other standard carriers as well, possibly new carriers and even past carriers. So like the Ahwahnee we were talking about earlier, that could end up with a secondary deflector as well sometime in the future. Again, that's nothing for sure yet, but it's a possibility. But what that means for the Ark Royal is that, well, you look at the Ark Royal, it's a full intel ship with a secondary temporal seat. It's got a commander level science seat and a lieutenant commander science seat, plus a lieutenant level universal seat, which you could again use for science. It's got 5 science consoles. This is basically a science ship, a really good science ship, but it also has 2 hangar bays. So you're going to be able to load that up with Type 7 shuttles, get a bunch of debuff out there. This is a very powerful science vessel. Now, I did debate on putting this ship here or another carrier on this list instead, the Terran Monitor, which I've criticized in the past for being a America Worker ship. I've always been of the opinion that America Worker really isn't that great for science, and that's because in my brain, I have been stuck like 2 or 3 years in the past when EPG builds completely revolved around spore-infused anomalies, and that's not really true anymore, and it's finally been able to be bored into my head that that's the case. EPG builds actually revolve around their universal consoles, and that's kind of always been true, but it's just gotten even more and more true since the Vovin's console came out, because you're able to get your universal console's cooldowns that much lower. So it's all about the combo of the Vovin console plus unconventional systems. Now, with that said, you would think that the Ark Royal would still have the edge there because of that Intel temporal seating, but the Monitor still does have its own temporal seat, and because it's a full America Worker ship, it has a full extra console slot. So basically, the trade-off is that if you're going to be in a very fast run of like ISE, the Monitor is going to have the edge there. But if you're in a more randomized setting, I feel like the Ark Royal is going to have the edge there, and I feel like that's why the Ark Royal ended up on the list here, because I feel like that's going to be going to have the appeal to more players than, whereas the Monitor is going to have more appeal to the high-end DPS chasers. And the last ship on this year's top 10 C-Store ships is going to be the Shangri-La Command Warship. And This is another one I kind of debated on whether or not I wanted this to be on the list or not, but I mean, this is a good ship. It's not an amazing ship, but it is still a really good ship. It's well-rounded enough that I feel like a lot of new players are going to be very attracted to this ship. It's a full command ship, so you've got a mix of durability and damage output there too. So you can do like suppression barrage to mitigate enemy damage. You've got the inspiration abilities, which can provide both really powerful damage buffs and a really powerful heal. You've got concentrate firepower, which is really great for torpedo builds. You've got a pilot seat on there, which you can also use for clean getaway, which is an uncon trigger, or you can do some silly crap like reinforcement squadrons, or what's that one ability that deploys the holographic decoy copies of your ship? I forget the name of it, but you can do that because that's always silly. And again, this being a warship means that not only is it going to be very tactical focused, but it does have a good balance of some durability, which is going to be matched with that Lieutenant Commander engineering seat. Normally, I would say Lieutenant Commander is a bit heavy for a tactical focus ship like this, but that's going to give you the option to mix in some durability into this ship. You know, so you can use like emergency power to engines for the speed buff and to trigger the emergency con hologram. Then you get emergency power to weapons, you know, to help buff your weapons if you're running an energy weapon build on this thing. And then you can run like either an uncon trigger like eject warp plasma or emit unstable warp bubble, or you can throw in something to help your survivability with reverse shield polarity. So you've got some options even with the engineering seat. And if you like torpedo builds, this actually has a pretty decent torpedo-themed console on here too. But the really big selling point with this ship is just the simple fact that this is a Tier 6 Constitution in the C-Store. Guys, that is something I have seen players beg for years. And I mean years, over a decade even. Like, I had given up hope on that actually happening. I never in my wildest dreams that we would see a normal C-Store ship as a Constitution variant. And even if it was, I didn't think it would include the Constitution costumes. But it does. Shangri-La is fully kit bashable with the Constitution refit and the original series Constitution, and it comes with both of those costumes. Or at the very least, they're very easy to obtain. Like the original series one, you still need to have like the Tier 1 Constitution, but that's insanely easy to get. Just go to a ship vendor and buy it for dilithium. But yeah, it's a Tier 6 Constitution, guys. It's a Tier 6 Constitution, and it actually has reasonably good stats that are really well-rounded that are going to appeal to a lot of players. This is a great ship. Go pick it up, because I know a lot of you have been begging for years for a Tier 6 Constitution. Here it is. Go get it. And it's also got the Shangri-La skin on it too, which is gorgeous. Like, you know, ever since Bill Krause started putting out the Shangri-La, people have been foaming at the mouth for this ship. And then it appeared in Star Trek Picard. And then I'm not going to talk about the Constitution 3, but it was in that that was the thing too. But now we've got the actual Shangri-La in the game, and it's gorgeous. Side note, it cannot be kit bashed with the Constitution 3 because Constitution 3 is like twice the size of this thing, and the parts wouldn't match up. But yeah, it's a T6 Constitution, guys. That alone kind of merits it, worth it being on this top 10 list, because that's something we've been begging for so long now, and it's finally here. Now, one last thing I would really want to make clear in this video, and I did something similar with this with the top 10 premium ships video for this year, is that they're your ship coupons, or it's your Zen, however you're obtaining these Zen store ships. It's your money, it's your coupon. Pick the ships that you want. Pick the ships that you think you're going to have fun in. Pick the ships with things that you think are going to benefit your builds. Because there's a lot of C-Store ships in the game at this point, guys. And like I said at the beginning of the video, packing it all down to just the top 10 is kind of difficult, because like there are a lot of ships that were on previous lists that didn't make it this year, some of which are still pretty valuable or still have really valuable stuff on them. It's just there was no room. There's too many ships. There's so many good ships in the C-Store, and there's just a lot of stuff to pick from. So yeah, just don't feel like you have to follow my advice. Pick the thing you want. That said, I feel like 50% of you are still going to want this thing, at least if that poll was correct. But that said, that's fine. Go pick the ship you want. Do not feel like you have to follow my advice. Well, I guess this technically counts as my advice too. But if you're going to follow any of my advice, follow this advice. Pick the ship you're going to have fun in, because only you know it's going to be fun for you. I hope you found this video helpful, or at least informative. If you did, let me know down in the comments down below. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you would like to further support the channel, you can hit that join button. Find the link to the merch store. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701, or check out any of the other affiliate links in the pinned comment. These things really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.